Let me tell you something. Most people won't say out loud, living alone as a woman is not a punishment. It's not a curse. And it's certainly not a reflection of failure. In fact, it's one of the most misunderstood signs of strength there is. A woman who lives alone has chosen herself, not because she had no other options, but because she finally realized her peace was too expensive to give away for free. People love to assume they see a woman who walks into her home with no one waiting, who eats dinner alone, who watches the sunset in silence, and they call her lonely. They think she's sad, but what they don't see is the power in that silence. They don't see the strength it takes to live without clinging, to breathe without chasing, to be without performing for love. That woman, the one who lives alone, she knows who she is. She's not hiding from life. She's creating it on her own terms. You see, there's a lie many of us were told, a dangerous, deep-rooted lie, that a woman isn't whole unless she's partnered, that her life doesn't begin until she's married, that her value increases only when a man claims her. But what happens when a woman stops believing that? What happens when she decides she is already whole, already worthy, already complete, with or without someone else by her side? What happens is she chooses herself, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. That kind of woman is rare, not because she's better than anyone else, but because she's done the work. She's faced the nights when the silence was deafening. She's cried on her own floor and still woke up and made her bed. She's held herself when no one else did. And that level of emotional self-reliance is not weakness. It's power. Quiet, sacred, unstoppable power. She no longer sacrifices her sanity for company. She no longer stays in rooms where she feels small just to feel seen. She doesn't entertain energy that drains her spirit because she's learned that being alone is far better than being in relationships that feel lonely. She's not running from love, she just refuses to run after it anymore. She knows that real love doesn't require her to shrink, to beg, or to lose herself in the process. And the beautiful part, she's not bitter. She's not closed off. Her heart is still open, wide open, but now it's protected by wisdom. She's ready to receive, but not desperate to grasp. She knows what she deserves, and she knows what she will no longer tolerate. Because when you learn to live alone, you also learn to listen to your own voice. Not the noise of the world, not the pressure of culture, and certainly not the opinions of those who don't understand your journey. Living alone has taught her how to cook for herself, speak to herself with kindness, and move through the world with intention. It's taught her that her joy isn't dependent on someone else's presence, that laughter can echo off the walls even when no one else is around, that peace doesn't come from people, it comes from alignment. And now that she's tasted that peace, she's not giving it up easily. People think being alone is a void, but for her, it's a canvas, a space where she's painting her own life, stroke by stroke, with no one controlling the brush but her. She's building, evolving, creating, not because she's waiting for someone to join her, but because she finally realizes she was the one she was waiting for all along. And when love does come, because it will, she'll meet it with a full heart, not an empty one. She won't need it to complete her. She'll share her life, not surrender it. Because now she knows a woman who lives alone and still stands tall has already won the hardest battle, the battle to love herself. That kind of strength, that kind of peace is not just powerful, It's sacred. For so long, many women are taught to find worth in being chosen by a man, by a partner, by a title that says, you're finally good enough. They're taught that love is something they must earn. Be prettier, be quieter, be less complicated, smile more, need less, wait longer, and so they become shapeshifters, pouring themselves into molds they were never meant to fit in, hoping someone will finally see their value. But that kind of waiting, that quiet, constant performing, it leaves scars, invisible ones, wounds that whisper, you're only lovable if you're less of yourself. But the woman who lives alone and stands in her truth, she's done waiting, she's done proving, she's done asking for crumbs and calling it a meal, because she knows now no one else's validation will ever replace the feeling of choosing herself. That kind of self-love isn't loud or boastful. It's quiet, steady, fierce. It shows up in the way she sets boundaries, in the way she walks away from what no longer serves her, in the way she speaks to herself with compassion, even on the days she feels broken. Choosing herself isn't about isolation, it's about liberation. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, I love you enough to not settle. I love you enough to walk away. I love you enough to protect your peace, even when it's hard. That kind of love doesn't come from fairy tales. It comes from fire, from rising out of the ashes of heartbreak, betrayal, silence, and survival. It comes from the days she cried alone, prayed alone, healed alone, and still stood up again. And here's what most won't understand. When a woman truly chooses herself, she becomes unavailable to anything that tries to steal her power. She no longer chases potential. She no longer begs for clarity. She no longer explains her standards. She doesn't do the emotional labor of dragging love out of people who only offer confusion. Her time is sacred now. Her energy is protected. Her peace is non-negotiable. And she's not cold, she's clear. She's not bitter, she's boundaries. She's not closed off, she's finally open to what's real. Because after choosing herself, she's realized that anyone who comes into her life must do the same. They must choose themselves too and meet her from a place of fullness, not lack. This journey of self-choice isn't always easy. It comes with lonely nights, hard goodbyes, and moments of doubt. But it's also the most honest love story she'll ever live. The one where she stops waiting to be saved and becomes her own sanctuary. There's something deeply misunderstood about a woman who lives alone. People see her solitude and immediately assume sadness. They look at her empty kitchen table, her quiet evenings, her one-bedroom sanctuary, and think she's missing something. But what they don't see is the sacred work happening behind those walls. What they fail to understand is that solitude isn't loneliness, it's evolution. It's where the woman stops pretending and starts transforming. When a woman lives alone, she's not just spending time by herself, she's meeting the parts of her soul that she had to neglect to survive. She's unpacking old stories. She's confronting wounds that were pushed aside in the name of love. She's hearing her own voice without interruption, without outside noise clouding her clarity. That stillness that so many fear is where she's finding her power. She's evolving because for the first time, she's not catering to someone else's mood, someone else's timeline, someone else's expectations. Her days are hers now. Her energy belongs to her. And within that freedom, she's discovering that she's so much more than what the world once told her she had to be. She's no longer confined to the roles of caregiver, pleaser, fixer. She's not waking up each day wondering if today she'll finally be enough for someone else. Because now she's learning how to be enough for herself. Yes, there are moments of ache. Of course, there are days when the silence feels heavy. She's human. But instead of running from those moments, she sits with them. She listens. She lets her heart speak. And in doing so, she begins to understand that the emptiness she once feared is actually a doorway to healing. It's a space that allows truth to rise, pain to be felt, and the soul to be heard. Evolution doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like crying on the couch at 2 a.m. Sometimes it's saying no to what you once begged for. Sometimes it's waking up to your own patterns and realizing you were the one abandoning yourself all along. But now she's catching herself. She's choosing differently. She's building a new story. Slowly, boldly, quietly. And here's the truth. When a woman gives herself permission to evolve in solitude, she becomes unshakable. Not because she's hardened, but because she's healed. She's rooted. She knows who she is and what she will no longer tolerate. She's not afraid to be alone because her alone is sacred now. It's not a waiting room, it's a transformation chamber. There's a quiet revolution happening inside the heart of a woman who chooses to live alone. A shift so deep, so powerful that most people wouldn't even recognize it unless they've walked that same path. It's the moment when she no longer tolerates the bare minimum, when she no longer sacrifices her peace just to say she has someone. When she looks at the mirror and says, I would rather be alone than settle for less than I deserve. That's not bitterness. That's clarity. That's the sound of a woman who has finally remembered her worth. She didn't get here overnight. No, the strength was earned. It was built through years of giving too much, trying too hard, staying too long. She knows what it feels like to dim her light, to shrink herself, to hold on to relationships that left her empty. She knows what it's like to be the one always compromising, always forgiving, always explaining. And when you live through enough of those moments, you reach a breaking point, or rather, a breakthrough. So now she refuses. She refuses to settle for half-truths, for emotional inconsistency, for love that comes with conditions. She refuses to engage in connections that make her question her value. Her peace is not up for negotiation anymore. Her joy is not something she's willing to trade for temporary company. She's not interested in situationships that drain her, conversations that go in circles, or partners who show up only when it's convenient. She's not being picky, she's being intentional. She's not closed off. She's focused. There's a difference between being alone and being available for anything. She's not alone because she can't find love. She's alone because she's choosing to wait for a love that mirrors the love she's finally giving herself. And the beautiful part is she doesn't carry resentment in her heart. No bitterness, no hate, just boundaries. Just the quiet understanding that what once broke her was really building her. That every time she let go of what wasn't meant for her, she made room for something better. She's already full of self-respect, full of truth, full of peace. She's learning to enjoy her own company, to celebrate her own milestones, to comfort herself when life gets hard. And when she does meet someone, it won't be from a place of need. It will be from abundance, from overflow, from choice, not desperation. So many people fear being alone because they've never learned to love themselves in solitude. But she has, and in doing so, she's rewritten the story. The woman who once gave too much now gives to herself first. The woman who once stayed silent now speaks with power. The woman who once begged to be seen has become her own witness. And now settling is no longer an option. It's not even a thought. Because once a woman realizes her worth, once she's tasted the peace of her own presence, once she's walked away from what doesn't align, she never goes back. When a woman learns to be alone, truly alone, something powerful begins to unfold. She starts learning how to trust herself. Not just in the big dramatic ways, but in the quiet, everyday moments that build a foundation of self-belief. She starts listening to the voice within, the one she used to silence for the sake of harmony. That voice becomes louder, clearer, stronger, because finally she has the space to hear it. And in that space, she discovers the one thing she was always searching for in others: inner safety. You see, self-trust isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. And most of the time, it only begins when everything else falls away. When she's no longer leaning on a relationship for direction, when she's no longer seeking outside permission to feel, to speak, to live, when she stops asking others, "What should I do?" and starts asking herself, "What do I know to be true for me?" That's when the shift begins. She realizes that the answers she's been chasing were always within her. That the red flags she ignored weren't because she couldn't see them, but because she didn't yet trust her own instincts. Now she does. Now, when her gut whispers, she listens. When her body tenses up around certain energy, she doesn't talk herself out of it. She's not interested in betraying her intuition just to maintain the illusion of connection. She'd rather honor herself and walk away in peace than stay and slowly lose pieces of her soul. Self-trust also means she no longer doubts her decisions just because others disagree. She knows herself deeply now, her rhythms, her limits, her truth. She's done explaining her choices to people who never lived her pain. She's not here to prove anything. She's here to live in alignment. And that kind of alignment doesn't require permission. She's the one who gets up when it's hard. She's the one who pays her bills, handles her emotions, comforts herself when the world feels cold. She's the one who holds herself steady through storms, not because it's easy, but because she's learned how to show up for herself. And that, right there, is the foundation of everything, knowing that no matter what happens, she has her own back. She's no longer afraid of being alone, because alone has become her sanctuary. It's where she recalibrates. It's where she remembers. It's where she rebuilds when life knocks her down. And in that space, she grows her trust not only in herself, but in something bigger. She begins to trust the timing of her life. She stops forcing things to happen and starts flowing. She lets go of control, but not in surrender to fear, in surrender to faith. Because once you've been alone long enough to hear your soul speak, you don't rush back into noise. You don't run into someone else's arms just to escape your own thoughts. You don't choose company over clarity. You choose you. Not because you're selfish, but because you finally understand that self-trust is the foundation of all other love. Without it, you'll always doubt. You'll always settle. You'll always bend just to fit. But not her, not anymore. She trusts her journey even when it's quiet. She trusts her timing even when it's slow. She trusts her choices even when no one claps. And that kind of trust can't be shaken by anyone's opinion or absence, because it was built in the fire. It was forged in the silence. It was grown in the dark. And now it sits hers forever. There's a kind of transformation that doesn't come from love or from approval or even from healing. It comes from power. And that power begins to rise when a woman finally claims her solitude, not as something she's surviving, but as something she's mastering. The woman who once questioned everything, who once felt lost without someone by her side, begins to understand just how unstoppable she is when her energy is no longer scattered, when she's no longer chasing anyone. When she finally says, "I'm enough for me," that's when she starts to reclaim her power. And when she does, she becomes something the world isn't ready for. A woman who no longer fears walking alone. A woman who doesn't flinch at silence. A woman who can hold herself up with both hands without leaning on anyone who doesn't know how to hold her in return. That kind of woman is dangerous, not because she seeks power over others, but because she no longer needs anything from them to feel whole. She stopped asking for permission to be who she is. She's not toning herself down to make anyone comfortable. She's not apologizing for the space she takes up. Her power doesn't come from dominance. It comes from alignment, from being so deeply rooted in her truth that nothing external can shake her foundation. And when love comes, she'll welcome it, not as a lifeline, but as a choice. Not to complete her, but to complement her. She's not closed off to love. She's just not willing to lose herself in it again. She knows now what her peace is worth, what her silence taught her, what her boundaries protect. And because she knows, she moves differently. She speaks with intention. She walks with certainty. She no longer settles, not because she's proud, but because she's free. Free from the belief that she needs to be saved. Free from the cycles that once kept her small. Free from the guilt of choosing herself first. That freedom is not loud. It doesn't always shout or demand attention, but it's felt. You can see it in the way she carries herself. You can hear it in the way she says no. You can feel it in the way she no longer negotiates her worth. And this freedom, it's not just hers for now, it's permanent. Because once a woman reclaims her power, she doesn't give it back. Not to anyone. Not even for love, especially not for love, because the love she found in herself is too deep to ever trade for something half true or half present. She has become her own sanctuary, her own protector, her own source of strength, and nothing and no one can take that from her now. Because once she stands fully in who she is with no need to perform, please, or prove, she's no longer surviving. She's rising,